Hey everyone, this is Rich from the Rich Maxwell channel. Welcome back to my channel. If you're new, the channel is about drones and photography, so please do consider subscribing if you're into those two things. Do a lot of videos here about the Sony E-mount camera system and lenses for the Sony E-mount cameras. So if you're a Sony camera user, certainly would be beneficial to subscribe. So hit subscribe now and hopefully hit the like button if you find this video useful. So this video I thought to put together because I've seen a lot of questions on forums and things about which camera to buy, the Sony A7R III or the Sony A7III. Now they're both really popular, really good cameras, and I thought I'd put this together because I recently picked up the Sony A7R III. So it was a bit of an agonizing choice between the two, and I went backwards and forwards over and over to try and decide which one to get, and ended up choosing the A7R III for a few reasons after doing a lot of research into the two cameras. So thought I'd just talk about those reasons now, and hopefully it will help you guys out if you're trying to pick between the two cameras. But either camera is going to be really good for photography or videography, so you're not going to be disappointed with whichever one you get, as they're both superb cameras and similar in a lot of ways. So let me just put that there up front. So this is not a video that's going to be knocking the Sony A7 III camera and saying that the A7R III is loads better or anything like that. The A7 III is a great camera still. But the reason I went for the A7R III then, there's several reasons, so let me just talk through them. So obviously the big difference between the two cameras is that the A7R III has 42 megapixels, whereas the A7 III is, I think, 24 or 25, so more of a standard megapixel sort of photo size. But the 42 megapixels, you might think it's a bit over the top, and people do complain that the file sizes are a bit big, especially if you do uncompressed RAW. But nowadays storage is really cheap, so it wasn't too much of an issue for me. I wasn't too concerned about the extra file size. It takes maybe a minute or two longer to copy all my files over from a memory card, and sometimes takes a little bit longer to do certain functions in Photoshop to images. But it's, I think, worth it to have those extra megapixels, because it can be so useful when you want to crop your images so that you don't have to, really use a very long, expensive telephoto lens like a 400mm. You can maybe use a 200 and then just crop in loads to still get a nice usable image. So that's a real beneficial advantage, and obvious one really, of having those extra megapixels. Now the other things that are not so obvious but really useful about extra megapixels are that when you're doing things in Photoshop, like say you want to do content aware fill or clone stamp things, having the extra megapixels just gives you more for the software to sample from. So that enables you to get better results when you're doing things like content aware fill, as there's just more of the image, more megapixels for the software to do its thing and do all its AI stuff to get you better results. So that's really good with it. And also, people say between these two cameras that the A7 III is better in low light because of its noise reduction capabilities, and having a smaller sensor means bigger pixels, so it captures better images with less noise. But the A7R III, I found that having all the extra megapixels of 42 megapixels, and plus it's pretty good anyway in low light, the images out of camera look really good, but having the extra megapixels means that when you do noise reduction features in your software like Lightroom or Photoshop, it's got more megapixels to, again, sort of process the image from and clone from and do its thing with, and really comes up really nicely with a bit of noise reduction in post. So the low light capabilities, I think, are just as good really in the A7R III, and I don't think it will disappoint anyone. Now, another big thing about the two cameras that I was surprised to hear, but after watching a few YouTube videos and hearing about it from a few people on these YouTube videos, they were saying that the build quality of the A7R III is slightly better than the A7 III. I'd heard from other YouTubers that in teardown videos that the A7R III has much more metal components inside, whereas the A7 III has more plasticky bits, so might be slightly better built, maybe it will last a little bit longer. So yeah, certainly that's a positive for it. And another thing that I think is a real benefit for anyone that does YouTube videos like myself is that in 4K at certainly 25 frames per second, there is no crop, whereas the A7 III, I believe, does crop slightly at 25 frames per second 4K. So that's really good because it means that you're going to get the most out of your wide-angle lenses. So I'm using a 17-28 to film this video now, so I'm getting the full 17 millimeters rather than it cropping in and getting an equivalent of about 20-22 millimeter focal length. So that's really good. So you're getting the most out of your lenses and not having that annoying crop in and and zooming in further than you need to. So yeah, for video, that's a definite plus. And the other advantage that you've got with the A7RIII is that you've got more of the custom modes on the top dial. So you know those little bits where it says 1, 2, 3, where you can put in loads of different settings in those. So I use one for like slow motion video, one for normal 4K 25, and then I have another one that's just for photography, but with animal eye autofocus. So that when I go to a zoo or whatever, I can just switch to that custom mode, and it's going to change the eye autofocus from human to animal subject. So that's just really useful. It saves you a bit of time and a few clicking about through your menu. The A7 III has got some custom modes, but I think it's only got 2. And also the mode button on the A7RIII has this handy little button thing so that it stops the dial accidentally turning in your camera bag. Now, some people don't like that. I think it's quite useful, and yeah, certainly I have in the past pulled my camera out with my old A7 II, and it had turned the dial button, and yeah, messed up what I was trying to do. So it's yeah, certainly good to have it locked in and in the modes that I want, like aperture priority or manual, depending on what I'm shooting. Now, the disadvantages or things that you might think are better in the A7 III. Like I said, the noise capabilities with the bigger pixels of only having 25 megapixels on the full frame sensor, it's probably going to be slightly better in low light conditions, but like I said, with the extra megapixels, you can clean it up really well in post. So I personally think that there's probably not going to be much difference by the time you've worked on your images. The other thing to mention is the A7 III does have the little autofocus points covering pretty much the whole sensor, whereas the A7R III is a bit more restricted to the center, but it does go pretty wide out into the sensor. And looking at it, in my opinion, because the sensor of the A7R III is taking 42 megapixel images, I would say that you've got at least 25 megapixels of that 42 covered with AF points. So you are really getting the same sort of AF performance as in the A7 III, as it's covering the same size image, but giving you all that extreme outer bit with the 42 megapixels. So in my opinion, autofocus on the A7R III is great. I've had no issues with it, been really pleased with it, and it's really fast with these Tamron lenses that I use. So the price difference, the A7R III slightly more expensive than the A7 III, but I found here in the UK there was about £200 difference, so it was a no-brainer for me to get a A7R III rather than the A7 III. It's yeah, it's just a minute difference really. But yeah, that could be a thing that comes into it. If your budget is a certain number and the A7 III is what it goes up to, then go for that. But I think it's worth paying the little bit extra, having the A7R III with all the ability to crop in and no crop in 4K. But yeah, like I said, both great cameras, so you're not going to be disappointed with either. And I hope you like this video. Please give it a like, give it a thumbs up, and let me know in the comments what you think of the two cameras, and maybe consider subscribing to my channel, as I do aim to get a video out each week, although in recent times has been a bit slower as the lockdown has changed my circumstances a bit, and it's made it a bit difficult to find the time for YouTube videos. But yeah, I hope this is useful for you all, and yeah, I hope you're all safe and well, and please join me again soon. Bye for now.